Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Beneath the Transaction podcast. I'm Chris. This is Kenzie. We are your hosts of the show. We have an amazing guest today. We've been a friend with H for several years now. And this is a treat because most of our guests we've had the last little while, a lot of our recordings have been folks I've been specifically sort of targeting out in the world that I feel have something to say different than we do regarding beneath what it takes to move beneath the transaction in work or at home, in life and leadership. We've been looking at different leaders and founders and organizational development specialists, philanthropists, and so on. But this is special because H was part of we'll call it the laboratory that we were learning all of these things. Now, we weren't seeing it as a laboratory, but that's where we conducted the research within the Leadership Institute. We had this gift of philanthropic investment for several years, and the community nominated leaders year after year to participate. Each was nominated to join the Institute. He actually was part of our last year, and this research wasn't done until the very end of his year. So he's going to have a great perspective on what it was like to go through the program. He had his life to live and his job and his family, but what the intentionality behind the Institute did for him. And that's what we want to uncover today. A little bit about H. I'll let him introduce himself a little more, but he's been in law enforcement for many years, and he's an instructor currently, teaches cadets, and he's done a number of other things. He also, I know H, you've also done some weightlifting stuff too, which I think is a pretty cool thing about you. But I'll turn the time to you to introduce yourself in the way that you'd like to, and then Kenzie and will jump in because we have some questions for you, and I'm excited for the conversation today.
Chris, Kenzie, it's a pleasure to be here with you both today. I always enjoy conversations with you two, and as we've gotten to know each other, they just continue to expand, which gives me great pleasure to be here today. So I really appreciate the invite. Yeah, law enforcement, and I guess now law enforcement adjacent. I've been in a training capacity for the last 8 years. Prior to that, my law enforcement time in Western Colorado, did a lot of different things in that time when I was out there. Yeah, I really, really recognize that I enjoy teaching. I enjoy mentoring. I enjoy coaching. There's only so much of that I could do in my role in law enforcement. So I jumped into training, and now I get to serve the interests of the next generation of law enforcement coming up through the ranks, and it's a quite rewarding profession. Yeah, enjoying what I'm doing.
Well, some more context with H too. When we had leaders join the Institute, they had to interview, and they came into our office and we sat down and we'd go through everything with them, and they had to sort of commit to the process. And I remember in that interview being pretty intimidated. H, you probably already know this. You've been probably told, but you're visually and your voice and everything could be real intimidating. So I remember feeling like, man, this guy, he seems like he's going to be pretty rough and tough. And that was my mental. And then we go to the retreat, a few months later, and I get to know you, and I actually write about you, in the book. It's in the purpose chapter. That's chapter 5. I use you as an example, and I talk about how, how I was so wrong with how I, perceived you versus just the depth that you had, and that you took principles so quickly. I remember conversations with you in the retreat, on day one, how things were impacting you so quickly and how open you were to transformation. And that really impressed upon me. And ever since that point, we've developed a deeper and stronger relationship. But I almost laugh at the paradigm shift that I had when I first met you versus how I saw you then to how I see you now. And unfortunately, I do that too often. I develop an idea of somebody before I get to know them. Maybe many of us do that. And I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to build a relationship. But I humor myself now by looking at you and thinking of how I saw you first off to how you immediately surprised me. But talk to us about that process. You got interviewed to join this institute where we talked about, we're here to catalyze transformation in our community. What were your initial thoughts? And then go into kind of your first experiences actually in the institute. What impressed upon you first?
First of all, I want to tell you, you're not alone in being maybe intimidated by my face, my shoulders, maybe. But even though when I introduce myself to students now, I tell them, I promise this face is not as mean as it looks. So just bear with me. Everything will be okay. So don't feel bad about that. So yeah, I got nominated by a coworker who I respect very much, who had previously been in one of your cohorts, and he nominated me, and I had no idea what to expect.
Terry?
Yeah, yeah, Terry. Yeah,
Was it Terry?
yes. I had no idea what to expect, but any opportunity to learn and grow is something I try and take advantage of at every turn. I went to the interview again, not knowing what to expect, not really knowing what I was walking into. I'd spoken to Terry a little bit about it, and I was very intrigued. And then, yeah, sitting down with you during that interview, I was very, very intrigued from the onset, and then got more and more ingrained. And I was hopeful that I was going to get accepted into the program from there. I did, thankfully. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And then we had the retreat, and the retreat kind of scared the crap out of me. I'm going to be honest with you. But going into it, what I told myself is I have to get out of my comfort zone. If I do what's comfortable for me, which is just sitting back and just listening and observing and not contributing and not speaking and not being a part of the process, then there's no way I'm going to be able to get the value out of this retreat in the next 12 months worth of programming that you had lined out. And that was what I did, and it was very uncomfortable at times. But at the end of each session, at the end of each break, at the end of each day, what I knew was my growth, because I made the decision to be uncomfortable, was going to be far greater than anything else. And I think it worked out okay in that regard, as far as the things that I took away, and the growth and the change that I was able to make, not only through that time, but since then, just how it's impacted me at work and at homes. Yeah, I mean, even down to singing karaoke, that was well outside my comfort zone,
You
but I
did.
knew, right?
With the I remember you held that water bottle in your hand too, and
I
you're
did.
singing.
It's like my security blanket, Chris. Come on, man. I got a coffee cup over here and a cup of water over here. What am I doing? Um, yeah, I knew I had to push my own envelope in order to develop the relationships that I thought were going to propel me forward in the program. I think that's what I did. So I try to do at least.
You're highlighting such an important piece in the programming because it took us a few years to figure this out. Purpose is the first one, and we can't force your own purpose. And I hope we get into this because I know the discovery of your own why was really important in the process. But from our end, in that interview, we talked about what our purpose was, that our purpose was to catalyze transformation in our community. And that's what we're all about. And we even asked, like, if that's something that is aligned with you, this is going to be a good fit. If it's not, then this probably isn't the program for you. So we emphasize purpose, but what I keep hearing from you is this intentionality behind your commitment to the process. And that's what really blew me away about you more than most is it would usually take people 3-4 months to sort of give themselves fully to the process. We had moments of vulnerability often where people would feel something, and they would have little bits of buy-in. But I remember specifically conversations with you at the retreat and breaks where I could tell this guy's in it, like he's really putting himself in the process and trusting this process. And I think this is such an important piece to transformation, to be committed to it, to be intentional behind it. Kenzie and I were talking about this even before we got on this call with you, is that's what stuck out to her as well, because she was at that retreat, and I know she had a couple of meaningful conversations with you as well. But I think this is so important in any process of transformation, whether it's in our life or our leadership. We can't be nonchalant about it. We have to commit to it and say, I'm going to do this. And I know it's not going to be easy. I know it's not going to be comfortable, but I'm going to commit to this process because transformation's a journey. It's not a destination. It's not a simple apply this recipe and all of a sudden it occurs. It's a journey and a process that takes time. And while intentionality is not a condition, it's kind of like the mortar that holds all of the bricks together. All of the conditions require intentionality. And we tried to do that on our end, running the Institute. And our hope was that individuals like yourself and our leaders and our participants would put that same level of intentionality behind it. And I sense that from the get-go with you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, and the analogy of the mortar that holds everything together being intention, I think is a great way to phrase it, because it really does have to be. It takes effort, right? It doesn't necessarily come overnight. You have to put the work in order to engage in long-standing change. I've been to a lot of trainings over the years where you kind of, you know, you jump through the hoops, you do all the things. You might leave for a week or two with some great ideas and some things you want to do, and then before you know it, you're on to the next thing, and it's just been no more than a passing thought. With this one, based on how you all built it and the level of commitment that you all put forward to structure it and having the thought of making it a re-engagement every month for 12 months to me said that there was something different about that program. And I thought I had to meet you where you were at. And then that level of intention and commitment on your part, I think helped me kind of up my game because, yeah, every day had to be intentional. It didn't matter what I had going on at home or at work. What I knew is that day of that month that I was spending with you all, you were going to get 100% of me because in order for me to get 100% of you, I had to be willing to exchange that sort of currency. And honestly, it was a no brainer for me.
Which I'm so curious because I just think my whole experience with you was just your openness and willingness to step out of your comfort zone, to experience transformation. I mean, our vision, and we just like gave it to everybody, be a catalyst for transformation. And everyone kind of has to like go on their own journey and discovery of what the heck that means and how to apply it to them personally. But I feel like you from the beginning were so on board, and I'm curious to know, like, what have you what have you gone through in your life to make that be such a reality for you at this point in your life? Like, what have you learned in past experiences that have gotten you to this point where you are so active and intentional in growth and progression?
Because not everybody's that way, truthfully, unfortunately, and you are very, again, I'll use the word commitment. You're very much committed to that. And that's unique. And again, not everybody is. So even if we asked that of people at the beginning, like I said, it took a few months for them to really open up to the idea. But my entire memory of your experience was that you were ready to go. And so I love Kenzie's question. What prepared you for that outside of before even meeting us?
That's a really good question and one I don't know I've thought of before. I think if I had to put it on something, I've always kind of been a teacher, whether it was in a professional sense or not. I've always informally been somewhat of a mentor, whether whether people wanted it or needed it. I've sort of taken on that role of helping foster growth in others. Sometimes intentional, sometimes excuse me, unintentionally, and sometimes very much by design. And I think the one thing that I've learned through those processes and those opportunities was the level of commitment that I had to bring in order for them to grow was going to have to be big. And seeing what you all had put together expressed to me the level of commitment that you all were bringing to bear. And like I said before, when you're willing to exchange that sort of currency, for lack of a better term, there's no way I was going to allow you all to do what you were doing and not completely commit to it from the get go. There was way too much capital, way too much brain power, way too much effort and time and everything spent on what you all were doing that I could not afford to let that opportunity slip by without being 100% engaged and committed from the very beginning. And again, I think it helped me knowing coming into it that I was going to be uncomfortable, but sitting in that discomfort and growing through that discomfort, I think really helped me along the way. But again, knowing that I was intentionally and very much by design getting outside of my comfort zone, I think that helped my overall commitment from the get go. We all had experiences within that group that we could learn from each other, whether it be personally or professionally. And for me, I've seen a lot, done a lot, been through a lot. And if I'm unwilling to share those experiences with others, then that may be a potential spot where they could grow that I'm unwilling to give them. So I think it was probably, I guess, all of those things in combination. Again, having never really thought much about why I approached it the way that I did, other than trying to gain as much of it as I could, I think that would probably be from an experience standpoint, the things I would look to that gave me that initial mindset going in.
Because you approached it with intention, because you approached it not as you were coming in with all the answers, that you were humble enough to say, how can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? How can I apply this in my leadership, in who I want to be outside of work? I think that really teed you up for an opportunity to grow in the way that you wanted, in the way that you're expressing. It helped you be successful. And I think that is I just loved highlighting that about you because I admired you from the get go.
Yeah, you mentioned discomfort quite a bit, and one of our mantras that we developed over that year was discomfort's the cheat code to growth, and you modeled that well. And I want to dive into purpose with you because I know the discovery of your why was a big part of the process and what that meant for you, even changing in some of your trajectory in your profession and how you approached your work and your family. But I do want to highlight one last thing about commitment was H was always the first one to show up and the last one to leave every single session that we had. And at the beginning, the first couple of months, you up early and you'd ask to help set stuff up and you'd stay late and ask to help take things. At first, I was like, no, 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 we got it. And you'd kind of still be, you'd linger long enough to where we just put you to work. And then after a couple of months, it was like, we'd be planning things and be like, well, H will be there. He'll help us set up or we're going to end. H will help carry down all the stuff. It just became such a normal thing because you were always the first there and the last one to leave. And I thought it was you just trying to be nice at the beginning. Then I realized, no, this is just H's commitment to his own values and to this whole process. And so I always appreciated that about your level of commitment wasn't just a mental thing. It was you were physically there in every aspect from before we began to after we ended to all the activities and the conversations that we had. And I think that takes effort. I don't think that comes naturally for anybody, and we have to choose to do that. In fact, the way we talk about commitment in the book is to choose and then keep choosing. We have to choose and keep choosing day after day, moment after moment to the things that we really believe in and want to do. So I just wanted to highlight that, but I want to get into the purpose and the why with you because I know that was a big part of your journey. And to tee this up for listeners, the first day of the retreat, we ask people to define their why in 20 words or less. And for a lot of people, they've never been asked to do that. And I was surprised when we first started this, the first couple of years. I mean, all of these leaders, a lot of them are C-suite level leaders, and they've never been asked that question. And only a handful could actually, like when I asked them, could raise their hand and define it clearly before having before having to put in the work to do it. So that was part of the process, and it was very intentional that we did that. And I always planned that they're never going to figure it out in one statement. It takes time for them to really lock it in. But talk to us about that process for you from when we first, we're diving into the soil section where we're getting into our own why in this deeply C section. Do we understand our own purpose and our own calling kind of a thing? And your journey with that, because I know that was a big part of the journey for you.
Yeah, it was. That was huge for me, and something I had been trying to define formally and informally since, I don't know, 2014, 2015. All came from a book. Started reading a book, and in that book, it tells you somewhere in like the 50 something pages, take a moment and write down your why. What drives you, what's your purpose. And I sat with it and I sat with it and I put the book away and thought on it for several days, and I couldn't come up with anything that I thought was relevant to why I was doing what I was doing. And it was really frustrating for me. And then, it would cycle back, and I actually went back to that book a couple years later and did the same thing all over again, and then met the exact same outcome. So day one, yeah, we're there, and you're telling us, hey, we're talking about this why in under 20 words, and kind of the way you phrased it, the way you approached it, and narrowing down to 20 words and then narrowing down to 15 words. I thought that was really a really really good way to keep it from getting too fluffy, if you will, to really hammering down on what that purpose is, what that why is, and sitting in that room with the book in front of me and a pen in my hand. I had nothing, and it was it was more frustration, right? Because I had tried this thing a couple times before. Now I'm in this room with all these big brains and all these leaders from around the community, and everyone's writing and everyone's doing their thing, and I'm just completely stumped, and I felt completely out of place in that moment. The next morning comes, and I had an in-camera interview with, I cannot remember his name to save my life. He
Tay,
was behind the, what was it? What was his name?
Tay,
Tay, that's right.
Tay.
He's behind the camera. I'm in front of the camera. And he asked me a question. And I can't even remember what the question was. And all at once it came to me. And I was like, oh my gosh. Went back to the classroom, scribbled it down, refined it a little bit. And I finally had my why. And that was huge for me. It was absolutely huge for me because it kind of created a guidepost for me on what I felt was important, again, in my personal and in my professional life. And quite frankly, it led me down a path of changing what I did professionally. but it provided me, again, with a little bit of a guidepost. It provided me with some clarity, and it helped drive my decisions from that point forward. And it's shifted a little bit. It's ebbed and flowed over time as you know, different things have come and gone, and I think that's probably to be expected as we enter different seasons of our lives. But yeah, finally being able to put on paper what that why and what that purpose was, absolutely huge for me that day.
Why do you think looking back it was so difficult to put it down to paper when you first read that book and then again, when we were doing that activity? What do you think was maybe in the way of being able to write it down?
I don't think I could get quite narrow enough. I think I was thinking far too broad, and in that very broad thinking, I wasn't really able to identify myself in any of the things I was coming up with. At one point in time, I my why was to live with purpose. I'm thinking, okay, that says nothing, right? Because I'm trying to find my purpose. I'm using that word so it didn't make sense to do it that way. I think being able to narrow down, focus a little bit more definitively on some of the smaller parts and pieces really helped craft that in my brain and then put it on paper.
Part of the fear that I've seen in my own life is the more specific I am about what my purpose is or about what my potential is, I'm also being very specific about what it's not. And then what it's not, if I'm putting what it is out into existence, then I leave what it's not also out in existence, which means now there's an opportunity for absolute failure because now I've defined what actually success looks like in my life. If I'm living with my purpose, I'm going to live in this sort of a way. I'm going to become this sort of a person. That has an opposite. And I found that a lot of people avoid being really clear about that because they're also trying to avoid being clear about what failure might look like for them. And I don't know if that's how what you experienced was, or if you used that language, but that's certainly been part of my journey is the clear that I've always gotten about my purpose. And as it's ebb and flowed over seasons of life, I also have to be really clear about the failure of that. And that hurts because then when you're living your life and you don't feel like it's in accordance with what you put out into existence, there is a big feeling of failure and doubt. And I think that's why a majority of people may avoid being clear about it.
Yeah, I don't. Again, I don't think you're wrong at all, right? Anytime we meet a crossroads where there's a failure point or a potential failure point, it very often causes us to pause and think and rethink exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, and which direction we need to go. And I think identifying the why is one of those intersections because I think you stated it very well from the standpoint of if we're not living our why, what's the point, right? If we are professing this and we're putting this out, as you said, in the universe, and this is who we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it, but there's that point or there's that element of failure in there, it almost makes you question everything before and what's to come next. So I can completely understand where that fear of failure and putting it out there would come from, and I guess subconsciously that may have been a bit why I was so stumped in that moment. But I think over time, and as I've grown, and as I've developed, and as I've learned, and as all the things in our lives occur, I think all of those things taken in total, in conjunction with some of the very upfront and direct conversations that we had had on those first couple of days, really helped me hone in on exactly what it was. And the nice thing about when I identified that why is it wasn't just professional; it had a lot of personal tie-ins as well. It was a really cool moment for me. What I came up with that day, that I still truly believe in, was to develop compassionate, empathetic, gritty people who can listen, learn, and engage with others. And for me, there's tremendous crossover there, what I do professionally and in my personal life. And I think that is why it meant so much to me in that moment. Because if I can drive my decision making, if I can drive my actions, if I can set my will in that direction based on those key points, then I won't fail. There's no failure that can come from that if I'm intentionally moving in those directions. If the interactions I'm having with people at work and the interactions I'm having with people at home or at the supermarket or whatever, if I am choosing my words and choosing my actions in accordance to that why, then there is no failure. And that's a really cool prospect for me, just to think that if I can be a part of living that way and then passing that on to others through my path, the trickle down effect could be tremendous. And just, where we could all be as either a small group at home or at work or as a large group in society, just kind of embodying some of those things, even just a little bit more, just a fraction more, could make a tremendous difference in total. So Again, it's kind of ebbed and flowed over time, but I do continue to come back to those themes on an ongoing basis as I interact with people. And I catch myself sometimes, I'll catch myself and I'll apologize to the person. Hey, I'm sorry about that. I cut you off. I was focused on what I was saying, not what you were saying. So please continue. And those types of things make a difference for me and for the person that I'm interacting with, because I would hope that it gives them the sense that I'm very focused on them and who they are, what they're doing, and what they're saying, and not just trying to overcome that problem to move on to the next one.
I can't help but think, there's people that could be listening that would wonder who cares? Like, why do we need a why? And why do we have to write it down? Why does it need to be under 20 words or less? Like this all sounds just kind of silly. And a couple of things that I always shared with leaders, and you might remember sharing some of these things that I think are important to consider. Organizations spend hours and money and resources in strategic planning, developing a vision statement, mission statement, values, etc., an extreme amount of resources, but then as individuals, we don't give it that same type of attention. And some of us go years and decades without ever giving it specificity. Now, we might in our heart know like what's important to us and what we stand for, but to put it out into existence and be intentional in writing it down makes a huge difference. It does for organizations. I would say organizations immediately set themselves up for failure if they're not intentional about that. And when they're really good at that, it puts them on an amazing trajectory because it's a North Star, it's a compass. It impacts decisions they make. It impacts everything, who they hire, why they do the things that they do, and it impacts how we do the things that we do. And I think the same goes for our own life. But that's all hearsay. That could all be just this theory. So I'd love to hear from you. What has the difference been in your life pre and post intentionality of defining your why? What's been the difference before? Are you glad that you took the time to do that?
I'm 100% glad I took the time to do that, and I'm very glad it finally worked. I think the difference, and it's just going to sound redundant because you mentioned the word intentional in the question. I think the difference has been my intentionality. I would like to think I was acting and doing things in that manner before, but I know definitively I am now. It's not to say it's all the time because I do make mistakes, right? Things happen. But I think being more focused and knowing those words that I wrote on that piece of paper that day and that hung on my wall for a long time helped develop some intentionality. And it's given me the opportunity to catch myself and to pause and to kind of redirect. Again, whether it's at home or at work, just understanding that it's at the front of my mind much more now than it ever was before, because I put it on paper, because I identified it, and because I was able to specifically point to things that I could do with my actions and with my words to positively impact others down the road. I think that's been the biggest difference. Rather than just kind of doing it subconsciously or unconsciously or whatever term you would use. You're the psychology guy. What word would that be? Anyway, rather than just doing it in the background, I'm doing it very intentionally and very, very much with focus. And again, I catch myself when I'm not, and I'm able to correct those things. And I would like to think that in me correcting those things openly to those that I'm speaking with, it's allowing them to learn and develop through that as well, whether they realize it or not. Because when someone you're speaking to sees you, maybe they see you checked out, and then you call yourself on it, and you ask them to please repeat, or I didn't mean to interrupt you, whatever the case is. I think that immediately builds not only credibility, but it builds relatability, and it builds an element of humility that person now may have a greater sense of in me, which I think is easily transferable to them in their interactions down the road.
I love where this conversation is going because, my thoughts before we recorded this episode was, the difference between living your life on autopilot versus living your life with intention. And and throughout this conversation, like that's just kept going off in my mind is there are clear differences when we live with purpose and we live with intention. The natural outcomes that on living a path of becoming are so clear and geez, like just powerful all around with personally and with the relationships and the connections that you have around you versus when you live a life on autopilot and you might not even know. And it's not to say you're like a bad person. you're living your life kind of just letting things go by, letting relationships come and go. And it's so easy to feel stuck in that moment. And it's so easy to feel the emotions of like the up and down, the fear of failure, the loss of control when we live in autopilot. We're definitely more exposed to those higher emotional ups and downs versus from my experience and kind of in my own life and then just observing the people around me when people are living with intention and they're striving to become and are intentional about all the different things that they're doing, emotional transparency is pretty amazing. And the ability to overcome fear, the ability to forgive, to grow, to love, to all those things are the door is open and transformation as this like journey becomes this really beautiful road versus when we're living in autopilot and life feels heavy. There really is this a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
There's points in time when we all kind of fall into that autopilot, where your schedule is lined out, where you wake up in the morning and got to get the kids off to school and you go to work and you do the thing and then you come home and you got to get into practice and do this and do that. I think sometimes just the as busy as our lives can get can kind of shift us into that autopilot every now and again. But I think for me, having things to point to, I can more intentionally focus even that small amount of time that I have with those in my world. I can more intentionally focus that and I can make better that time than I was before. Right. So whether it's driving a conversation, starting a conversation, dropping my kids off somewhere or picking them up somewhere, how I drive that interaction is much more intentional. It's much more focused now than it was before, where maybe it was, hey, how was school today? Oh, it was fine. Okay, cool. And then, turn the music on and get going wherever we're going. But being able and willing to dive a little bit deeper to not only to have conversation with them, but to help them learn and grow and develop along the way. Again, it just for me, of that particular why helps shift those things in a much more positive direction. It helps kind of shift those things into learning opportunities and growth opportunities. I coached a football team last season, little kids, fifth and sixth graders. And at times it was absolutely infuriating. But at other times it was the best experience I'd ever had because while I was frustrated with them because they were talking too much or whatever was going on, there's always a learning opportunity in there. And if I could identify in myself as a coach to those fifth and sixth graders opportunities to impart some of the things that I thought would help them improve not only on the football field but as people off the field, that was huge for me. Right. And I had a lot of those opportunities, right? Whether you're talking about, pushing past your own boundaries or, recognizing that you can do more than you thought you ever could, or understanding that it's okay to make mistakes as long as we're learning from them, putting them behind us and moving forward. Those types of lessons, I don't know that they would have come quite as organically or intentionally if I hadn't identified that why, because again, that just helps drive my interactions on a daily basis at work and at home. Because, and I keep saying at work and at home, and I say that because there is so much carryover. And I haven't met anyone in any field of work that has told me that some element of work doesn't come home and some element of home doesn't go to work. There's so much crossover in what we do at work and what we do at home, how we interact with people. If you have a bad day at work, a lot of times we let that become a bad day at home and vice versa. So the ability to kind of cross over and understand that I don't have to be two separate people. I don't have to do things incredibly differently as long as I kind of have my values and my why in line. I can largely be who I am, obviously to the degree where it's not going to get you disciplined or fired at work or divorced at home, but you get where I'm going with this. You can kind of be the same person as long as that form, that version is moving in a positive direction. And I think for me, that why and the crossover between the two um, has done a lot. I teach students a lot where I'm at now about resiliency and wellness. And one of the things that I talk to them about is we don't want you to just be healthy and fruitful professionally. We want you to be healthy and fruitful personally as well, because at the end of your career, what's going to be left for you is those relationships at home. And if you're not investing in those relationships at home, and you're not doing the things to continue to move those things forward personally, it doesn't really matter how great your professional career was, because at some point in time, that's going to come to an end. So being able to have crossover and being able to work on both simultaneously, I think is critically important to all of us in all of our aspects of work, because there never seems to be enough time in the workday to get all the things done. And there never seems to be enough time at home to continually invest in the manner that we really, really want to invest in those relationships at home. So again, being able to kind of find crossover, so you're not having to learn two different sets of skills and two different sets of communication and all of those things. Yeah, I think there's profound impact in that regard.
Well, transformation, it's holistic is a way to put it. It's not compartmentalized to one aspect of our life. And that's a really good metric to give ourselves between the difference, understand the difference between change and transformation. Change can be compartmentalized to an aspect of our life. Transformation is holistic and it impacts everything. And so there are no compartments, there's no boundaries to home, work, play, this, that. It's a journey that our life and being is on, and it impacts everything. So I think that's a difference to kind of clarify between transformation and change. One can be compartmentalized, the other cannot. And that's the same with every condition of transformation: purpose, commitment, common language, consistent vulnerability, so on and so forth. And, to take it a step further with purpose, we talk about purpose, why, meaning. Those words can be interchanged. They mean slightly different things, different vantage points to the same principle that we're getting at. But when we're talking about autopilot or going through the motions, the word that what we'll say the more academic word that we use in the book is transaction. Like, those are all transactional ways of living, and we need transaction to survive, certainly, but we can allow life to only become that of transaction, and then we miss so many moments. Like you said, I go to work, I come home, I go take kids to practices, blah, blah, repeat, repeat, repeat. And when we're living transactionally, we just see them as tasks that need to be done. And I start to see my life and my purpose as, well, I work because that's what I have to do. I have a family, I got to take care of them, and this and that. And then we miss the moments that could really matter when we're living intentionally, or when we're living with a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, or have clarified our why. And, we talked about this in our institute, and I write about this in the book, of different forms of meaning. And one is having a work to do. And that's a great form of meaning, but it can be taken away from us. Our jobs change, life circumstances change, families change, so on. And so it's just not, it's a form of meaning, but it's not the deepest form. And we ought to not define our why based upon that level of meaning. If I define my why off of the level of meaning of a work to do, then I've made it too concrete. I've made it, which is bad with a why. And it's bad because concrete means it can be achieved, and then I'm done. And then if I'm done with it, then what? And there's no focus on becoming, which is what Kenzie was talking about. Is a good why statement has us become something, and we're on this pursuit of becoming rather this pursuit of achievement, because achievement can come and go. So that's why if we define a why off of that first level of meaning of having a work to do, it's just not deep enough. The second level we talked about is human relationships. Our meaning often is derived from those that we're in relation with, our family first and foremost, spouse, kids, parents, siblings, you name it, friendships, people that we work with. And that's a deeper form. But even then, if our why is only written to that level of meaning, what if our family circumstance changes? What if our friends change? We have people that pass away. Life can take away even our relationships in an instant. And then if that's taken away, then what? Are we lost? We don't have any more meaning. We don't have any more purpose. Our why is now shattered. And so that's a good form of meaning and a great way to define a why statement. But the deepest form that we talk about is, and Frankl talks about this in his work with logotherapy, is based out of suffering. And suffering is one way to talk about it, but you've used the word discomfort, right? When we can find a sense of meaning out of things that we've been through that are difficult, the discomfort we've gone through, the suffering we've gone through, and define our why and based on what we've learned from those moments, that's the deepest form of meaning that life can never take away from us. Because those are lessons learned in the trenches. Those are lessons learned in the hard times, and nothing can take that from us. No change in circumstance, no change in life and job and family situation is going to take away that level of meaning. But we have to choose to find meaning in those hard times, and then have the the intention, like we've been talking about, to then write down a why statement that envelops that and all of the things above it, relationships, a work to do, so on and so forth. And that takes a lot of time and intention, and I think that is also, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think that's part of the journey that you were on throughout the year. Because I remember, January, we had that retreat, but months later, you were still wrestling with your why. I even remember one moment where I was sharing a story that touches on similar things that you've mentioned, where I had this realization that I was pursuing these excellence in all these professional ways and academic ways, but I had really let some of my personal relationships fall to the wayside. I wasn't taking care of them the way I should, which means I was compartmentalizing things, which means I was trying to change. I wasn't trying to transform. And I had to have that realization. I remember you talking to me once about that and saying, Chris, it's taken me a while to know if you're for real or not, man. Like you open up and you share all these things about yourself when you're vulnerable. And at first I didn't believe you. And I remember having that conversation with you where you were just honest with me. I didn't know you for real at first, man, but you just keep talking about it and you keep living it and you're talking about these things. And I don't know if that's a strength of mine rather than that's just the only way that I know how to create a space for people to go on this journey as well. Because if I put on a facade or image of perfection, then I ruin the whole journey of transformation altogether. Because it's not a perfect journey. It's not one that looks super sexy or that sounds awesome, and it's a tough one that it's gritty and it's hard and it's challenging, and it's there's a lot of discomfort and there's a lot of suffering. And I just noticed that in our conversations throughout the year, the depth and the deeper and deeper that you were taking these principles, that it wasn't just a transactional, I wrote it down, I'm clear on my why now. You were wrestling with this and you were really pulling at all the aspects of your life to try to understand this. And that was my perception. So again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that was my perception of you throughout the year. And I'd love to get any of your thoughts on that depth of defining a why, because we've talked about the sort of technical piece of it, but the depth of it, I think, is what impressed me the most about you as the year went on.
Yeah, I think your perception is largely accurate. I really did. After I wrote that down, like I said, it kind of gave me a guidepost, but it also forced me to realize that there was a lot of areas that I could be doing differently. There's a lot of things I could be doing differently. There was a lot of interactions and relationships that I could be approaching differently. Quite frankly, I didn't know, and I think the biggest part of my struggle was probably the role that I was in at that time when I started the institute and I identified my why. I thought was too far away from actually being able to live my why every day. And it forced a change for me. It forced a job shift, same place, different role, to where I thought I could potentially live my why to a greater degree and impact more people in the manner that I had hoped to, in the manner that I had kind of developed my why around. So yeah, I think your perception is very accurate in regard to continuing to struggle with that why throughout that time. And again, it was difficult. Like we talked about before, it was uncomfortable, but I also knew I didn't have all the answers. I also knew there was things I could be doing differently. I also knew that at my age, I still had a ton of growth. Well, at anyone's age, you still have opportunity for growth. But for me specifically, I knew I still had a ton of opportunity for growth. And if I wasn't willing to wrestle with those things and really be very introspective on all aspects of my life, that I was going to lose those opportunities to grow through that transformation or grow into that sort of transformation that I'm hoping to find. And it wasn't any, we keep talking about this purpose and finding purpose and how profound it was for me. And it was certainly a profound moment, but there was so many aspects of what we were discussing over that time. And a lot of it just came in the informal conversations that I had with individuals in the cohort or with you two or with any of the guest speakers that we had coming in, and just being able to understand a different perspective. We all came from very different walks of life. We did different things, different parts of the world in some cases. And the perspective that I was able to gain from having those conversations formally and informally, I think were probably the biggest benefit of me kind of figuring out where I needed to be professionally, which then helped me get to a better place personally. So yeah, kind of aligning all of those things, some of it by accident, some of it by design, but really intentionally and uncomfortably having those conversations with myself and with other individuals that I was fortunate enough to come in contact with, I think made a tremendous impact on my overall experience that year. My transformation is obviously not complete in my case because I'm still learning and working through things, but to kind of jumpstart that moving forward, yeah, that was pretty profound.
I admire you so much, H. Every time I talk to you, I just feel like I just like want to be like you.
No, you don't.
um, and no, I'm serious. Like, even the very first time I heard your purpose, and even I would love if you wouldn't mind just restating it again, because I would love to just hear it one more time. Will you share your purpose one more time?
Yeah, it's to develop compassionate, empathetic, gritty people who can listen, learn, and engage with others. That was
Yeah,
what I came up with that.
I love that first, and you said it's kind of morphed and changed over time, and one of the things that I really value the most out of it from the first time I heard it and now was that your purpose was about you, but it was also not about you. Does that make sense? It was who you want to be in in every aspect of your life, how you want to inspire those around you. And when I think about you as a football coach, I like get so excited because I think that for someone who like I grew up in sports, and like you would be the coach that I would want to have if I knew who you were and you were living the way you live and you have this perspective. Like, oh my gosh, you would be, I know you're an incredible coach and you have the right heart for it because I know your purpose. Because I know your purpose isn't about you want to be the best football coach in the world or you know everything and all these kids need to listen to you. And I'm giving like the big, big bad examples, the extremes. But the point is that your purpose was so genuine and real, taken from places in your past experience in your life where maybe you experienced what happened when you weren't gritty, when you weren't, the opposite of your purpose, and you suffered and it was hard and it was challenging. Therefore, your purpose is I want to be, this is what I've learned, and this is how I want to live, and this is what I want to inspire in others when they are in relationship with me.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point around purpose, which is, I talked about this, the difference between achieving and becoming is when you have a really good, well thought out purpose and put it into a wise statement, it's a process of becoming for the individual that put it out into existence, but it becomes of service to those around you, right? Whereas when we create a wise statement or purpose that's focused on something concrete, on achievement, it's self-serving, and sometimes we become an obstacle or disservice to other people. Even if I were to say, hey, my purpose is I want to help 100 people a day, that can easily turn self-serving because now I'm only going to check those boxes so that I can say I did the thing, and it's self-serving because I'm somebody, I had to do 100 things a day for somebody, and so I might not even be really helpful to those people. I'm just doing it, and they become a vehicle and mechanism in my path to self-serve my goal of doing these things. Versus if I create a wise statement that causes me to become the sort of person that just helps people, then that's different. And I'm now of service to them. I think that's when I hear you say that, Kenzie, that's what I'm hearing you say about H's is it's very much about him becoming the sort of person that allows those principles that are in your wise statement to flourish in those around you. So it's about you becoming somebody consistently, but you're also in service to those around you every day. I think those are great qualities of a really powerful wise statement.
Yeah, I think that's really an excellent way of kind of framing what it means to have a solid or significant purpose with real focus behind it. You know, if and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier too. If your purpose is achievable, what do you do after you achieve it? Where do you go from there? Right? Do you have that sense of kind of drowning again, where you're trying to identify the next thing? Versus the other side of the coin where it's in service, right? It's something that I can continually do, or you can continually do, or Kenzie can continually do over and over and over again. And as you move through that, although it may refine a little bit. You may redefine things a little bit. You're still continuing to move forward along that path that, doesn't necessarily have an end in sight, if you will. And I think in that regard, the growth potential is tremendous because when you achieve that thing, good, like you said, it's a checkbox, more of a transactional thing in the end of it. Whereas the other side is just a continual process. It's the continual growth. It's the continual potential development or service to others around you. And one thing we know very well is that service to others is one of the best ways to kind of develop that resiliency in yourself and develop a greater sense of who you really are and manage the day to day even better is in service of others. Yeah, I think having a purpose that kind of fits that end much more beneficial than something that has a very definable achievement at the end of it. I think those are probably more I think you can have those benchmarks along the way that kind of serve that purpose, but to have an achievable purpose, I don't know that I would have known this prior to the conversations that we've had over time and the depth of discussions that I've been fortunate enough to have with you all. But yeah, an achievable purpose, it's a goal, right? It's not a true purpose. The purpose is behind the goal. The purpose shouldn't be that end zone or that net. So you guys are soccer players. That's not necessarily the purpose. That's the goal. The purpose is bigger than that. The purpose helps you achieve those goals along the way. So yeah, I think to make the distinction between those two things, I think is important when identifying that purpose.
I think too often we confuse the two and we make a purpose or we make a why in our mind, whether we're intentional in writing it down or not, that's more oriented in the goal theory and goal ideology. And the struggle with that is in pursuit of those goals, we are not always happy with who we become in the process because the fixed outcome is something that we want so much and we orient our life so much to accomplish it. Sometimes we leave a wake behind us and we become someone that we're not always proud of. Versus if we let the purpose lead and becoming lead, it now informs our goals and the things that we do after. But the purpose leads, and that's what's first. And so I think being really clear and not confusing those is another reason why purpose is so important. I want to leave with yeah, I want to leave you with a question that you can put into a statement for people. The question's this is why is it worth living beneath the transaction? What would you say to that to kind of close off our episode? Why is it worth living and leading, I'll add, beneath the transaction?
For me, it's all about relationships, personally and professionally. As a formal leader in an organization, as an informal leader in organizations over time, it all comes down to relationships. Um, if you're just leading and guiding and living at that transactional level, you're missing so many opportunities to get to know what truly makes people tick. And from there, continue to grow along the way. I think living beneath the transaction for me is just as much about my own personal and professional growth as it is those around me when I choose to see them as more than a transaction, to see those interactions as more than just a transaction. Yeah, there's tremendous opportunity in getting beneath the transaction that I don't think exists without the intention and the focus of doing that on a daily basis. It takes work, it takes time, it takes effort, but it is achievable. And although we as individuals, we're never going to be perfect in regard to all of those interactions, and we will still have those transactions along the way, as you stated earlier. But when we can intentionally focus on being, as you said, beneath that transaction, I think it opens us up for so much individual growth along the way that it becomes too much to live any other way once we understand the potential capability that can unlock.
That's awesome.
That's a great answer. And it really does highlight too, when you live a life with purpose, it's really hard to live a transactional life. Like it pushes you down the path of transformation.
You can't unsee it. So once you've chosen to live with purpose, you've you've set a standard in your life that you now have to actively ignore or defy. You have to live with that. And so I think that's part of that fear of failure. So I put this out into existence. So I'm now going to orient my life and my values to pursue this goal of becoming, something. And that's the journey of transformation. So
it is so easy to switch off into autopilot. It's like things get really hard,
Well,
life gets complicated, there's
autopilot's
drama,
so
like interactions or
it's so
relationships all of a sudden
easy.
get difficult, and then it's like, "Oop, I'm gonna go to autopilot,"
It's
like,
so easy.
this is hard. But there's always a way to switch back. And when you have a purpose that can be that guidepost, like what you talked about, that's what helps us kind of, okay, let's take a step back for a minute. Let's take a deep breath. Let's get back, reorient ourselves back to who I really want to be, what I really want to become, what kind of person, what kind of mom do I want to be, what kind of leader do I want to be, and then kind of get us back on the path of transformation.
To close us out, I think there's been, this is a snapshot of a masterclass on conversation around purpose and transformation. I've enjoyed the conversation, H, and I think anyone who's listening, there's multiple takeaways from this, and I think if anyone is struggling, feeling stuck, and feeling kind of a like they're caught up in all of the checklists and the transaction, and their life might feel full and busy. So I'm not saying that when we live without clear purpose that life is dull and boring. It could be full of activity and lots of things going on, but still something could be missing. And I think one of the greatest regrets that any of us could have is that we live a long life and we look back and it went by too fast. We didn't get to become all the things that we hoped to become. We didn't get to do some of the things we wanted to do. We didn't get to have the impact that we wanted to have. And a life lived with purpose is one that is lived without regret, because even the suffering and even the hardships take on a meaning. There's a reason behind them when we live with purpose. When we live without it, they become points of pain and bitterness and resentment, and they don't have to be that. And so the good and the bad start to take on meaning in life. And H, I think you've been an example for both Kenzie and I as we've gotten to know you the last few years. You certainly stood out in all of our cohorts as just, a phenomenal person and leader. And that's not to say that you're perfect. So I'm not trying to put you on a pedestal, but you're someone that got it, that you understood what we were doing and why we were doing it, and you made the choice to buy into the process. And that's how we catalyze transformation. That is how we break through the transaction, is simply by choosing to do so. For that, I'm thankful, my friend. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate, again, the opportunity to be here and have a nice conversation with the two of you today. Yeah, far from perfect, but that's where growth comes from. Hopefully, whoever happens upon this podcast over time can pull something from your words or mine and continue to set their journey in a positive direction.
So just one last question just to end us off. I have loved all the advice you've ever given me. Do you have any advice for our listeners who may be struggling with defining their why? You understand their wrestle and their challenge. Have any advice for our listeners who are in the wrestle of trying to define their purpose?
I would probably say, if you're struggling to find your purpose, don't let it leave the back of your mind, because those times and opportunities when you least expect it might be what makes that light bulb go off and finally helps you craft and identify that purpose.
Love that. Thank you, H. Also, thanks for wearing that collared shirt for us today. I know that was probably that was a twisting of the arm. We didn't ask.
Very few and far between, but you guys were worth it.
Stepping into discomfort.
That's right. That's right.
Well, thanks, H, again. Appreciate you and anybody who's tuned in and listened to this. I know that if you've listened this far, you found value. So join us again, and thank you. And that's another episode for us here on Beneath the Transaction. So until next time, take care.